Please, someone help me. The words cut through the roar of engines like a knife through cloth, sharp, desperate, trembling. The Willow Highway was usually a place of silence and long shadows. A lonely stretch of asphalt nestled between a thick, aging forest and miles of fields that hadn't grown crops in decades. Nothing ever happened there. No towns, no traffic lights, no reason for anyone to stop unless their car broke down or they were hopelessly lost. But on that quiet Sunday afternoon, something happened. A group of bikers, 6 of them, rode in formation, their leather jackets flapping in the wind, sunlight glinting off metal as the thrum of their engines dominated the stillness. They were the kind of men people whispered about in diners and gas stations. Broad shoulders, tattoos creeping up their necks, boots scuffed from fights they rarely talked about. Society labeled them trouble, and maybe once upon a time some of them were. But the road had shaped them differently, softened the edges. Life had sharpened too much. Their leader, a mountain of a man called Bear, rode at the front. He was impossible to miss. Barrel-chested, arms thick as tree trunks, and a beard so wild it looked like it grew with a mind of its own. Despite his intimidating appearance, he was steady, quiet, and fiercely protective of the people he cared about. He wasn't the kind of man who looked for trouble. But if trouble found him first, well, that was a different story. The group had just rounded a bend when Bear's head snapped toward the forest. The others followed his gaze. A girl, small, no older than 10, was stumbling out from the trees, her face streaked with tears, her arms waving frantically. She looked like she had run a marathon barefoot through brambles. Her shirt was dirty, torn at the hem, and her hair was matted with leaves and twigs. Bear's hand shot up, and every biker slowed instantly, the engines shifting from thunder to a low growl as they rolled to a stop. The girl kept calling for help, her voice cracking as she stumbled toward the road. Bear was off his bike before the engine had fully settled into silence. The others followed, forming a loose semicircle as the girl finally reached them and collapsed to her knees. Hey, Bear said, kneeling beside her as gently as he could. You're all right. You're safe now. What's going on? The girl lifted her head. Her eyes were wild, wide, frantic, full of a fear none of them had ever seen in a child. My stepfather, she choked, every word dragging splinters through her throat. He's selling me. Please don't let him take me back. The bikers froze. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them had to. Their expressions changed instantly. Faces hardening, jaws tightening, hands balling into fists. The air around them seemed to crackle, as if the ground itself were bracing for the storm tightening inside each man's chest. Bear's nostrils flared. Kid, he said, lowering his voice until it was more of a vow than a reassurance. You're safe now. We ain't going anywhere. Not without you. The girl clung to his arm as if letting go meant death. But what Bear didn't know, what none of them realized, was that the danger wasn't behind her. It was near, very near. The first sign came from Ruckus, one of the younger bikers with eyes sharp enough to pick a coin off the highway at 50 miles per hour. He stiffened and glanced at the forest behind them. Bear, he murmured. We got movement. Bear's head snapped toward the trees. The others positioned themselves instinctively, shifting so the girl was behind them. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, and then a man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall and lean, wearing jeans dark enough to hide stains, and a jacket too clean for someone walking the woods. His face had the kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes, cold, sharp, brittle. The girl whimpered the moment she saw him. There you are, sweetheart, the man said, voice smooth and oily. I've been looking all over for you. Bear rose slowly to his full height, blocking the man's path like a wall made of anger. Stay right where you are, Bear growled. The man rolled his eyes. Oh, come on now. Don't go playing hero. This here's a family matter. Ruckus sneered. Nah, family matters don't make kids run barefoot through the damn woods begging strangers for help. She's confused, the man snapped, losing his composure for the first time. You don't know what you're talking about. The girl shook her head violently. Don't let him take me. Bear stepped forward, cracking his knuckles so loudly the sound echoed like gunshots. Listen close, he said. We ain't cops. We ain't lawyers. We're not the type who wait around to fill out forms. You hurt that kid, even a little. You're going to leave here in pieces. The man's lips curled. You think you scare me? I have. He never finished. Ruckus swung. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even necessary. It was instinct. Pure furious instinct. His fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him stumbling backward into a patch of dirt. You don't lay a finger on her, Ruckus spat. The man scrambled back to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. His face twisted into something venomous. You're going to regret that. He turned and bolted into the woods. Bear cursed loudly. Ruckus, why'd you let him run? He wasn't exactly taking volunteers for a hug, Ruckus muttered. You didn't waste time arguing. He turned to the girl. Sweetheart, what's your name? Leia. All right, Leia. We need to get you out of here. Somewhere safe. She nodded frantically. Bear motioned the riders to their bikes. Ace, on the handlebars, his voice rough but steady. You don't got to thank us. We do what needs doing. Always have. The bikers rode toward town with their engines rumbling like a promise. Behind them, the forest swallowed the wreckage. Ahead of them, sunlight broke through the clouds. Gentleness that looked almost impossible on his grizzled, intimidating frame. You did the right thing, he told her. You did exactly what you had to do, and we're going to handle this now. You hear me? You're safe with us. Lily nodded, but her gaze flicked toward the forest as a sharp crack echoed through the underbrush. A stick snapped. A heavy footstep followed. Bear stood instantly. The bikers shifted like predators, sensing movement, like wolves aligning themselves between a threat and their pack's most vulnerable member. Their bodies formed a wall of denim, leather, and fury. The woods were suddenly too quiet. Lily's breath hitched. It's him. More snapping branches. The sound of someone pushing through thick brush. And then, breaking through the shadows as if pulled from a nightmare, Rick emerged. He was taller than most of them expected, broad-shouldered with a greasy, unshaven face and a pair of bloodshot eyes that twitched with frantic energy. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair disheveled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. But what stood out most was the expression on his face. Panic, desperation, and a twisted kind of possessive rage that made Lily step backward until she bumped into Bear's leg. Lily, Rick spat, stumbling forward. You little brat, you better get your ass over here right now. Every biker tensed simultaneously. Rick jabbed a shaking finger at the girl. I told you to stay put. You think you can run from me? You think you can embarrass me like this? Lily pressed herself against Bear's leg. Bear took one step forward, towering over the man like a shadow, swallowing a flame. That's far enough, he growled. Rick froze mid-step, eyes darting from one biker to the next. His frantic expression wavered, uncertainty flickering behind the bravado. This ain't your business, he barked. This is my kid. She's not yours. Ruckus snapped. And even if she was, you sure as hell ain't acting like a father. Rick's eyes twitched again. You don't know anything. She doesn't know anything. She panics. She lies. Kids do that. Stone barked out a humorless laugh. Yeah, that's it then. Why is she shaking like a leaf just looking at you? Rick's jaw clenched. She belongs with me. No, Bear said, voice dropping low enough to vibrate the air between them. She doesn't, and you're not taking her anywhere. Rick's breathing became erratic. The confidence he tried to muster was crumbling. He wasn't dealing with a single Good Samaritan he could intimidate. He was facing 6 bikers built like walking fortresses, each glaring at him with a promise of violence simmering beneath the surface. He swallowed hard, something desperate and dangerous flashing through his eyes. You don't understand, he said. I didn't have a choice. I owe money a lot. They said they'd kill me. I needed time. They said they'd pay. Bear's expression hardened into something lethal. You're going to sell your kid to buy yourself time? He said. That's your excuse. Rick sputtered. You don't get it, man. Those guys don't play around. Neither do we, Stone muttered. Bear stepped forward again. You lay a hand on her even once. You make her run into the woods. You scare her so bad, she's crying herself dry telling us what you've done. We get just fine. Rick's face twisted. You don't get to take her. He lunged. He didn't get far. Bear pushed Lily behind him and stepped into Rick's path with the speed and precision of someone who'd been in more fights than most people had birthdays. But he was a man who knew how to bluff. He puffed out his chest, lifted his chin, and smirked despite the tremor in his hands. "You bikers think you're tough?" he snarled. "I know people, dangerous people. You mess with me and you'll regret it." Bear stared at him without blinking. "Try us." Rick lunged. It was stupid, foolish, reckless. But rage isn't logical, and neither are desperate men. He charged forward like a bull blinded by fury, aiming directly for Lily. She shrieked and stumbled back, but she didn't need to run far. The bikers reacted faster than he could take 3 steps. Ruckus grabbed Rick's arm, twisting it behind his back with a practiced efficiency that suggested he had done this more times than he cared to admit. Bones strained, muscles stretched, and Rick cried out in pain as his knees buckled. Before Rick could even process what had happened, Stone stepped in, snatching the phone from Rick's pocket in one swift, angry movement. Ace held Rick steady, using his boot to pin the man's foot to the ground in case he tried to kick or scramble away. In less than 3 seconds, the fight was gone from Rick's body, but not the shouting. "Let go of me," he screamed, voice cracking with a mixture of fury and panic. "You can't do this. This is illegal. You think you can just assault me? I'll have you all locked up." Bear ignored him. He walked past the struggling man and crouched beside Lily. Her eyes were wide, still frightened, but not with the same suffocating terror she had shown before. Her breathing was still fast, but a different emotion flickered behind the fear. Relief. "Hey," Bear said gently, lowering himself to her level. "You're okay. Look at me." Lily looked up. Her hands trembled at her sides, dirt smudging her arms. Her cheeks streaked with dried tears. "We're calling the police," Bear told her, his voice soft but firm, the tone of someone making a promise he would defend with his life. "You're safe now. I promise." Behind them, Rick thrashed, but the bikers held him down easily. "Let me go," Rick bellowed. "You don't understand. She's lying. She always lies. She's trying to ruin my life. You don't know what she's capable of." Tank leaned down until he was inches from Rick's face. "You're not doing yourself any favors, man." Rick spit on the ground. "You bikers think you're heroes. You're nothing. You're trash criminals. I know people who will come after you. I know." "Enough," Stone snapped, his voice cold as steel. "You're done." Rick's face twisted into something ugly. He glared at Lily with an intensity that made Bear's blood boil. "This is your fault," Rick hissed. "All of it." Lily flinched. Bear stood instantly, towering over Rick in a way that made even the forest seem smaller. "You're not talking to her," Bear growled. "Not anymore. Not ever again." Rick sneered, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Ace pulled a zip tie from his saddlebag. Standard road gear for securing loose parts, but just as effective for restraining violent men. In one swift motion, he bound Rick's wrists behind his back. Rick struggled, but only made the plastic bite deeper. Tank took a step back. "What's the plan, Bear?" Bear's eyes stayed on Rick as he spoke. "Stone, call in." Stone flipped open Rick's phone. Since they didn't trust Rick's lies, they would use his own device and dialed emergency services. He switched to speaker so everyone could hear the dispatcher on the line. 911, what's your emergency?" "Yes," Stone said calmly, though his voice carried an undercurrent of irritation. "Got a situation out on Willow Highway, near mile marker 42. A man tried to abduct a minor. She escaped and flagged us down. We've got him restrained, sending location now." "Is the child injured?" the dispatcher asked. Lily shook her head quickly. "No," Stone said, "but she's scared and needs medical attention just to be safe." "And the suspect contained." Tank smirked. "He ain't going anywhere." Rick screamed something unintelligible, but the dispatcher had already heard worse. "We're sending officers and EMS," the dispatcher said. "Stay where you are." "We'll be here," Stone replied. He hung up. A thick, heavy silence settled over the clearing. Rick panted, exhausted from fighting restraints he couldn't break. Sweat dripped down his face. Dirt clung to his arms. His chest rose and fell in frantic bursts. "You people don't get it," he gasped. "You think this ends with the cops? You think they'll protect you from the guy's I.O.? You think the cops will protect her?" Bear said, "That's all that matters. Rick shook his head violently. They're going to kill me. You don't know who I'm dealing with. You don't. Ruckus leaned forward, resting his forearm casually on his knee. Maybe you should have thought of that before trying to sell your own kid, like she was a used tire. Rick's face crumpled with a mix of anger and humiliation. You don't understand, he said again, voice cracking. I didn't have a choice. Bear's voice turned to thunder. You always had a choice. Rick opened his mouth to shout something back, but Lily spoke first. Her voice was soft, but cut sharper than any knife. You didn't protect me. You didn't care about me. You only cared about yourself. Rick flinched like she had struck him. Lily stood behind Bear, her small frame half hidden by his bulk, but her words carried with surprising strength. You said you love my mom, she whispered. But if you did, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have hurt me. Rick stared at her, stunned. For the first time since he'd appeared, there was a flicker of something different in his eyes. Not regret, not kindness, but the realization that he had finally lost control completely. Bear placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. You're not going back with him, he said. Not today. Not ever. Lily nodded, eyes shining with tears, but she wasn't crying from fear anymore. Relief washed over her. She knew without a shred of doubt that Rick's hold over her was broken. Distant sirens began to wail through the trees. Rick looked toward the sound, and something inside him snapped. His face contorted. You're all dead, he shrieked. You hear me? Dead. All of you. Tank stepped closer, looming over him. Buddy, if I were you, I'd shut up. Rick didn't, but it didn't matter because as the police cars pulled up, tires crunching over gravel, lights flashing red and blue, Lily stepped behind Bear and leaned into the safety of a shadow. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt protected. This wasn't just a rescue. It was justice, and it was only the beginning. When the police arrived, the force changed. The silence that had hung so heavily over the clearing was replaced by the distant hum of engines, the crunch of tires on gravel, the crackle of radios, and a low murmur of officers assessing the scene. Red and blue lights strobed through the trees, painting the trunks in shifting color and turning dust motes into tiny drifting stars. 2 patrol cars pulled up, followed by an unmarked SUV. Doors opened in quick succession. Uniformed officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters, eyes scanning the surroundings with trained suspicion. Rick, still sitting on the ground with his wrists bound behind his back, straightened up like he'd been given a second chance at life. There you are, he cried out, voice suddenly full of hope and outrage. Thank God these lunatics jumped me. They're kidnapping me. The nearest officer, a broad-shouldered woman whose hair was pulled back into a severe bun, shot him a sharp look, but didn't move to help him. Instead, she glanced at the bikers, at Lily, at the way Bear stood half a step in front of her. We got a couple of different versions of this story we're about to hear, she said, voice even. Officer, Stone said, lifting his hands slightly to show they were empty. We restrained him after this girl came out of the woods begging us for help. She said he was trying to sell her. Rick barked a frantic laugh. Sell her? Are you hearing this? They're insane. The second officer, a younger man with tired eyes, turned to Lily. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her height, though he kept his distance. Sweetheart, he said quietly, can you tell me your name? Lily swallowed. Lily. Okay, Lily. His voice softened a little more. Can you tell me what happened? She glanced up at Bear. He nodded once, giving her that same steady look he'd given her since they met. The kind that said, I'm not going anywhere, and you don't have to do this alone. Lily took a breath, and then she stepped forward. Her legs were wobbly, her stomach twisting like it wanted to collapse, but she stood anyway, gravel pressed into the soles of her dusty shoes. Her hands shook, but she kept them at her sides. He's lying, she said, eyes locked on the officer. They didn't kidnap him. They saved me. The officer listened carefully, his expression serious but calm. The female officer moved closer too. Attention fixed on Lily now. Go on, she encouraged. So Lily told them. She told them about the bruises she'd hidden under long sleeves and baggy clothes. How she pretended to trip or fall whenever a teacher or neighbor asked what had happened. She told them about the late-night strangers who came to the house. The The men with cold eyes and loud voices. The smell of cigarettes and cheap alcohol that clung to the hallways after they left. She told them about the whispered threats she'd overheard through thin walls. Words like debt, deadline, and consequences. She talked about the nights she'd lie awake, listening to Rick pacing downstairs, muttering to himself, bottles clinking, furniture being knocked over, and then her voice shaking but steady. She told them about today. He brought me here, she said, glancing around the trees. He said we were just going for a drive, but he wouldn't look at me. He kept squeezing the steering wheel so hard his hands were shaking. The officers exchanged a look. Lily continued. He said I had to behave, that if I messed this up, we'd both be in trouble. He stopped the truck and told me to stay inside while he called someone. Her breath hitched, but she pushed through. I heard him say, I brought what you asked for. Rick shouted from the ground, voice cracking. She's making this up. She's quiet. The female officer snapped without looking at him. Lily's eyes flicked toward Rick for only a moment before she forced herself to look away. I got scared, she said. I thought if I stayed, something bad would happen. So when he walked away, I got out of the truck and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran. I heard motorcycles, and I followed the sound. When I saw them, she gestured to the bikers. I yelled for help. She clenched her fists. They didn't hurt me. They didn't touch me. They stood in front of me. They told me I was safe. They were the only ones who tried to help. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were clear now. The clearing went quiet again, except for Rick's ragged breathing and the faint crackle of a police radio. The younger officer slowly rose to his feet. The female officer's gaze hardened as she turned toward Rick. Sir, she said sharply, based on the testimony we've just heard, and what dispatch already told us, stand up. You can't be serious, Rick sputtered. She's a kid. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's confused. She always exaggerates. Stand up. There was no more wiggle room in her tone. No more softness, just authority. Rust and Tank stepped back, giving the officers room. Rick staggered to his feet, still sputtering, still trying to twist the story. They attacked me. They're criminals. Look at them there. The officer cut him off with the sound of steel handcuffs. She snapped them around his wrists with quick practiced movements, removing the zip ties and replacing them with official restraints. The loud click echoed in the clearing. Richard Collins, you're under arrest, she said. You have the right to remain silent, she continued the Miranda warning, voice calm, controlled, a steady drumbeat over Rick's rising panic. Rick cursed at the bikers, hurling insults, calling them trash, thugs, losers. He promised revenge. He screamed that they'd regret crossing him, that they had no idea who they were messing with. Not one biker reacted. They just stood there, arms folded or hands resting at their sides, their expressions unreadable. Their eyes never left Rick until the officer led him to the patrol car and pushed him gently but firmly into the back seat. The door slammed shut with a finality that settled deep in Lily's chest. As the car pulled away, kicking up dust, Lily watched it go. Her shoulders started to shake. For a moment, she tried to hold it together, biting her lip, clenching her fists, blinking fast. But the dam had cracked too many times today. This time it broke. She didn't cry like before. No panicked sobs or silent tears swallowed down out of fear. This was different. This was a release. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed into her palms, her small body folding in on itself like a collapsing tent now that the storm had passed. Bear knelt beside her again, lowering his large frame down onto one knee in the dirt. He didn't say anything at first. He just let her cry. When her sobs finally softened into shaky breaths, he spoke. You've got a lot of courage, he told her, his voice soft and rough all at once. More than most grown-ups I've met. Lily sniffed, lifting her head. Her cheeks were wet and blotchy, but there was something new in her eyes. Something steadier, stronger. I was so scared, she whispered. I know, Bear said, but you still ran. You still spoke up. That's what courage is. Being scared and doing it anyway. One of the other bikers, Ace, had already stepped aside with his own phone. He was talking quietly with someone pacing near the edge of the clearing. Yeah, he said into the receiver. 10-year-old girl. No other family around that we know of. Yeah, She disclosed physical abuse and attempted trafficking. Police are on scene. Yeah, we'll stay with her until you get here. He hung up and walked back. Child Protective Services is sending someone, he announced. They're coordinating with the cops. They said there's a foster family nearby. Good people. Lots of experience with kids who've been through hell. They'll meet us at the station. Lily listened, wiping her face with the back of her hand. A foster family? She asked softly. Just for now, Bear said. Until things get sorted. They'll make sure you're safe. You won't be alone. Are they nice? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. Ace smiled slightly. Lady on the phone said they're the kind who bake too many cookies and argue about board games. Sounds pretty nice to me. For the first time, a faint, hesitant smile tugged at the corner of Lily's mouth. The officers finished speaking with the bikers, taking their statements one by one. Each man told the same story in his own rough-edged way. Girl runs out of the woods, begs for help. Stepfather shows up furious, threatens, lunges, gets restrained. No one exaggerated. No one embellished. They didn't need to. The truth was bad enough. When it was all done, the officers offered to take Lily to the station in their car, but she glanced at Bear, clutching the hem of his vest like an anchor. Can I ride with him? She asked, pointing to the row of motorcycles. The officers exchanged a look. The female officer's expression softened. As long as you wear a helmet, she said, and you stick with these guys straight to the station. No detours. Bear nodded respectfully. You got it, officer. They found the smallest helmet they had. Tank had one for his young niece. He sometimes took for short rides. It was a little big on Lily, but when he strapped it on tight, it fit well enough. Before they left, though, something important remained. The bikers gathered around their bikes, rummaging through saddlebags and pockets until Russ pulled out a small leather bracelet. It was simple, dark brown, with a tiny metal emblem fastened in the center. Their club symbol, a winged wheel. He turned it over in his hands for a moment, then held it out toward Lily. We want you to have this, he said. Her eyes widened. Really? Bear nodded. It's our emblem, our colors. We don't give it out to just anyone. It's like your shield, Tank added. You wear that. And you remember there are people out here who've got your back always. Lily held out her wrist. Rust fastened the bracelet around it with surprising gentleness for someone whose hands looked like they were better suited for wrenches and steel bars. The leather was worn but sturdy, warm from his touch. She stared at it like it was made of gold. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. You already did, Bear said, by trusting us. She moved slowly, almost cautiously, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Bear's neck in a tight hug. For a second, he went still, caught off guard. Then his arms came up around her, careful and protective, like he was afraid she might shatter if he squeezed too hard. Thank you, she murmured into his shoulder. You saved my life. After Bear, she hugged each of them in turn. Tank, Stone, Ace, Ruckus, Rust, and the others. Some of them looked awkward and unused to this kind of gratitude, but none of them pulled away. A few cleared their throats, staring off into the trees like there was suddenly something very interesting about the bark. When she was done, Bear helped her onto the back of his bike, making sure her feet were secure on the pegs. Hold on tight, he said. She wrapped her arms around his middle. Whenever you see a biker on the road, Bear told her, glancing back with a small smile, know that someone's looking out for you. Might not be us every time, but there's more of us than you think. She nodded, fingers tightening over the fabric of his vest. The engines roared back to life, a chorus of sound that no longer frightened her. They weren't just loud machines anymore. They were the sound of escape, of safety, of moving forward. As they rolled out of the clearing, heading toward the town, the police car leading the way. Lily looked down at the bracelet on her wrist. The leather was snug and warm. A shield, they called it. And for the first time a few weeks later, long after the dust on Willow Highway had settled and the forest had returned to its quiet hum, something unexpected arrived at the bikers' clubhouse. It came in a pale blue envelope decorated with hand-drawn flowers around the edges, the kind a child might doodle while thinking hard about what to say. The handwriting was small, uneven, and full of earnest concentration. The name Bear was written across the front in dark purple ink, but it had been addressed to the whole club. When a mail slid into the clubhouse mailbox, Tank was the one who found it. He had been heading out for coffee when he spotted the envelope sitting among bills, advertisements, and club notices. The flowers caught his eye immediately. He froze, staring, recognizing something soft and familiar in the shapes. He didn't open it. Instead, he tucked it into his vest pocket and walked straight to the meeting hall. The others were already there: Bear, Stone, Ace, Ruckus, Rust, and a few prospects, talking about upcoming rides and maintenance on the older bikes. The meeting hall was a mix of old wood, chrome memorabilia, and the faint smell of fuel and leather. A large flag with the club's emblem hung at the front next to a rack of tools. The place was rugged, worn by years of stories, arguments, laughter, and brotherhood. Tank walked in silently. He placed the envelope on the center table. Every conversation stopped. For a moment, no one spoke. No one breathed. Bear reached out and picked up the envelope, turning it over in his massive hands. His rough thumbs brushed over the tiny hand-drawn flowers. "It's from her," he said softly. A ripple of emotion moved through the room. Not loud or dramatic, but heavy, like the collective exhale of men who didn't often allow themselves tenderness. Bear slid a finger under the flap and opened it carefully, like he was afraid the slightest force might tear something precious. Inside was a folded letter on pastel writing paper and a drawing. He opened the letter first. Lily's handwriting stumbled at times, small wobbles where she must have paused to think or spell something out. But the heart behind every word came through clearly. "Dear Bear and everyone, I hope you're all doing good. I'm doing good. I'm safe. The foster family I live with now is really nice. They have a dog named Cooper who likes sleeping on my feet. They say I'm part of the family now. I like that a lot." Bear's throat tightened. "I'm doing really well in school. My teacher said I'm brave because I share my story during a writing assignment. I told the truth. I'm not scared anymore. I sleep all the way through the night now without nightmares." A long silence hung over the room as Bear read. Even Ruckus had stopped fidgeting. Even Stone, usually the first to crack a sarcastic remark, stayed absolutely still. "We planted a garden in the backyard. I planted a sunflower and named it Rosie. It's getting really tall. I think it might get taller than me one day. Sometimes I sit outside and draw pictures of the garden, or of Cooper, or of the sky." There was a small smudge of what looked like dirt in the corner of the page. Maybe from the garden itself. I also drew a picture of you guys. The ones who saved me. The ones who didn't drive past. The ones who believed me. Bear unfolded the drawing. Everyone leaned forward. It was done in colored pencil and crayon. Bright and messy in the best way. 7 tall bikers stood in a protective circle around a small girl holding a sunflower. Their vests were a bit crooked and their boots too big, but the feeling behind it was unmistakable. Each biker had been drawn with care. One with a big beard, one with spiky hair, one with a bandana, one with tattoos scribbled up his arms. At the bottom, Lily had written "My Guardians." Ace let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Tank rubbed at his eyes and muttered, "Damn allergies." Ruckus swallowed hard. Kid's got talent. But Bear didn't speak. He just stared at the drawing. Finally, he picked up the letter again. "I wanted to say thank you. Not just for saving me that day, but for stopping, for listening, for caring. Not everyone does that, but you did. I'm not scared to be outside anymore. I'm not scared of the dark. I'm not scared of people knocking on the door. I'm not scared of being alone because I'm not alone. You gave me a bracelet that day. I wear it every day. My foster mom says it means I have protectors watching over me. I like that. Whenever I hear motorcycles on the road now, I smile. I hope it's you. Even if it's not, I still feel safe because I know I'm not forgotten. Thank you for everything. I'll never forget you. From Lily." Bear folded the letter very slowly, carefully, reverently. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Stone cleared his throat. "We gotta frame that." Bear nodded once. "Yeah, we do." They picked a spot on the wall right next to the club's emblem. A place of honor, usually reserved for the most important memories. Rust fetched a frame from storage, a simple wooden glass piece they used for old photos from rides gone by. Together, they mounted Lily's drawing. It hung there proudly, centered and polished, brightening the whole room with its innocence and gratitude. The letter was placed into a protective sleeve and pinned next to it. Bear made sure it was straight before stepping back. "You done?" Ruckus asked. Bear straightened it again. "Now I'm done," he muttered. The others smiled. The story of what happened that day had spread across town like a summer wildfire. Fast, unstoppable, and leaving people talking long after the initial spark. At diners and gas stations, at the grocery store and the hardware shop, people whispered about the bikers who saved a little girl from her abusive stepfather. For years, the club had been seen as rough, dangerous, unpredictable. Men who belonged on the fringes, not among polite society. People avoided them in parking lots, glanced nervously when their engines rumbled down the street, crossed to the opposite sidewalk when they walked by. But something shifted after that day on Willow Highway. More people waved. More people nodded in appreciation instead of fear. A few even walked up to thank the bikers directly. Awkwardly, yes, but sincerely. One parent brought cupcakes. Another dropped off coffee. A local teacher invited them to speak about courage at the school's assembly, though Bear politely declined, claiming he was allergic to microphones. No one saw them differently, because they wanted praise. They saw them differently because the truth finally had room to be seen. These men, these rough-edged, road-worn, leather-clad giants were protectors at heart, family by choice, shields for the broken, safe harbors for the scared. Lily's picture became a symbol in the hall, a reminder of why they did what they did. A reminder that being strong wasn't just about fists and engines and roaring down the highway. It was about knowing when to stand between danger and the innocent. Her letter became something even more important, a message they passed between themselves when days were hard. They quoted it during meetings, rides, even repairs. "You didn't ride past me. You stopped. You listened. You cared. Thank you." The words settled deep in each of them, becoming something like a silent motto, a promise they intended to keep. Sometimes heroes didn't wear capes. They didn't live in stories about gods or worlds far away. Sometimes heroes wore dusty boots, heavy vests, and helmets scratched from years of storms. Sometimes heroes rode motorcycles. And sometimes saving a life wasn't about dramatic battles or daring rescues. Sometimes saving a life was as simple and as profound as stopping for a child's cry in the woods and listening and believing and standing your ground when a small voice begged you not to leave. The bikers never expected anything in return. They weren't men who collected trophies or posed for pictures. But that drawing on the wall, that gift from a little girl whose life had been changed forever, was worth more than any medal or newspaper headline could ever be. It became part of who they were, part of their story. And when they rode weeks later, engines roaring down open roads, each of them knew one truth that felt like wind in their lungs and strength in their bones. They had done the right thing. And somewhere a little girl, named Lily, slept peacefully, wore a leather bracelet proudly, and felt safe in a world that had once been too dark. Because 7 bikers didn't ride past. They stopped. They listened. They cared. In a long time, she believed.